It was high drama in Congress as House Democrats staged an all-night sit-in demanding action on gun control legislation they say is being held up by the Republicans.
To stand up for the wife who was shot and killed by her drunken husband.
The video that came out of the House chamber looked like this because the majority party, currently the Republicans, controls the video feed and turned it off. In 2016, the easy alternative to be heard and seen is social media. Legislators use their cell phones to tweet and post live video. Some individual posts with hashtags like "No Bill, No Break" and "Hold the Floor" were seen by more than 1 million people. Massachusetts Congresswoman Katherine Clark was one of the reps who spearheaded the effort. She was heartened by the reaction she witnessed.
The gallery in the House chamber last night started to fill late into the night with people coming to literally applaud our efforts. And we saw a spontaneous group of people grow to hundreds of people at the bottom of the Capitol steps asking for a vote.
The sit-in drew a different response from House Speaker Paul Ryan.
This is nothing more than a publicity stunt. That's point number one. Point number two is this bill was already defeated in the United States Senate.
I went out to Copley Square earlier today to see how people feel about this kind of protest on the House floor.
I think it's fabulous, and I think it's about time people stood up and said it's too much, it's over the top. And I applaud John Lewis and the other people who sat with him and protested.
But the way they're doing is I don't agree. You should work with the Republican and come up with a solution.
I think it's great. They have to do something. I don't know if they're going to get a vote, but at least they get the publicity.
Can an action like this be effective, or is it all about show? And what does it say about the current state of bipartisan relations in Washington? Joining me to kick it around are Thomas Whalen, a political science professor from Boston University, Heather Cox Richardson, a political historian at BC, and Dante Ramos, a Boston Globe editorial writer. Thanks for being here, all of you. So what did the Democrats actually get out of this?
Well, political optics-wise, a major victory, because when you think about it, Speaker Ryan looks like Doogie Howser with a gavel there in the House chamber, and he's going against John Lewis, who has the moral high ground, a hero of the civil rights movement. And, they have an issue that polling shows most Americans are in favor of, preventing terrorists from getting assault rifles.
Dante?
I think in the moment it's a victory for the Democrats who are clearly looking for some kind of way to change the conversation around guns and some kind of way to break through this idea that developed after Newtown, which is that essentially the NRA won and there's not a whole lot that can be done here. And
there's that infamous tweet or famous tweet where someone says, basically, when the American public decided after Newtown that it was okay for people to be able to use guns to kill kids, the NRA had won, or words to that effect.
Right, and this is an attempt to restart that discussion, where I think as part of the sort of long-run trend in the House and in the Senate, it's not quite as encouraging. There's a great piece that was out this week by Jonathan Rauch of the Brookings Institution. Some of you might have seen it in The Atlantic about the breakdown of the informal institutions of government. Rauch calls them the unwritten Constitution. And, he talks about over a period of time, the institutions that used to hold Congress together and make it work have kind of fallen apart. This protest is almost a kind of an affirmation that has occurred. And you see from the dismissive reaction of Paul Ryan and others that, it's just a publicity stunt, that, it's not clear that it's really going to have a major effect on legislation. I hope that's wrong. I tend to be sympathetic.
It's a good point to mention, if we haven't before, that they wrapped up the sit-in without getting the vote that they wanted to get. Heather, what's your take?
Well, to say it's a publicity stunt is in part true, but so many of the things that have happened since Obama became president have been publicity stunts on the part of the Republicans. But that being said, I think this was actually a really important moment because over the course of the last 10 days, we've had a number of people coming out and saying we have to change the conversation about what America really means. Who are we? What do we stand for? The fact that we had the Lieutenant Governor of Utah going down to Orlando and saying America has to be kinder and gentler, that's a paraphrase, of course, force. That mattered. Over 10 days, we've got people saying the conversation about America can no longer be about us versus them. Black versus white, love versus hatred. And at this moment, what those people did by staging that sit-in was to say, this government must cease to represent that division. We must take the government back over for the people who believe in gun control, amnesty for undocumented immigrants, and so
just to
on.
build on that, it's important. The Democrats knew they couldn't win this fight legislatively, but they want to get on record where you stand on the issue, the Republicans. So I think this is an important first step because they can use this against Republican candidates in the fall like a mallet because, as we know, in presidential election cycles, Democrats have a much higher turnout. So this will help down the ballot.
Heather mentioned moving away from an us versus them type of political rhetoric, but it seems to me that by infusing the push for gun control with civil rights era symbolism, the Democrats are doing the opposite. They're suggesting that morally there's only one appropriate course of action here. I got the impression, watching this unfold, that Democrats were very excited to be able to take selfies with John Lewis and to sing "We Shall Overcome" with John Lewis. But I'm wondering if that's really beneficial long term. You were talking about the political long term. You think that's a good strategy looking down the road?
Again, I guess I could argue this both ways. On the one hand, they're up against a very destructive and very kind of entrenched, negative, unproductive dynamic within the Congress itself. On the other hand, I mean, there is an emerging narrative, if you put this together with the presidential race, where the Democrats are trying to portray themselves as a party that is actually trying to do something and is trying to be the adults in the room and is trying to, actually push policy forward. And the Republican Party has been such a, I don't know what to say. It's been such a circus that there's a contrast that they're trying to make, and this could help with that.
Right now, our conservative viewers heard you talk about the Dems being the adults in the room and are making wisecracks about them sitting down on the floor of the House chamber.
Sure, of course.
So this
is a great issue, though, because the vast majority of Americans stand with the Democrats on this one, not with the Republicans. It's not a middle ground issue.
And it also shows the Democrats have some guts. I mean, too often they've been in this supine position in the House and in the Senate when it regards to gun control, afraid they're going to lose election come the fall. And this is a stand up and be counted moment.
All right, so this protest began on the same day that Donald Trump gave his heavily hyped, long-awaited speech against Hillary Clinton. Let's take a listen to some of what the presumptive Republican nominee had to say and how Hillary Clinton responded.
Hillary Clinton, and as you know, most people know, she's a world-class liar. Just look at her pathetic email server statements or her phony landing. Or her phony landing in Bosnia, where she said she was under attack.
Donald hates it when anyone points out how hollow his sales pitch really is. And I guess my speech yesterday must have gotten under his skin.
So let's start with Trump. Did the speech have the withering effect he obviously hoped it would? Not all at once,
Well,
time for all of you.
That's the problem. You get to a certain point in the presidential campaign where you've heard all of these lines before, and I'm not sure he has really put a whole lot more on the table. He's showing a little bit more polish, reading from a teleprompter, but there's a downside to that. When there's a pre-existing copy of the speech, Andrea Mitchell on NBC was able to go through it and said after he finished, oh yeah, well everything much of what he said was false. Whereas if he's speaking off the cuff, it's less fact-checkable. It's less prone to the kind of scrutiny that people say he should be getting all along.
2 words, Trump University. I mean, he's being under investigation for fraud, committing fraud in federal court.
Right.
And the thing is, if there's anyone else making those charges against Hillary, I think, yeah, that would have resonance. But look at the source who's making these charges.
Can I ask you about a different topic, or do you feel strongly about weighing in on Trump?
He's got to look presidential, and he does not look presidential.
All right, briefly before we go, there is a new poll out from the Pew Research Center which shows that the American electorate is more polarized than it's been in about a quarter century. They asked Democrats and Republicans if certain terms apply to members of the other party. Here we see 55% of Democrats feel afraid when they hear about Republicans. 49% of Republicans feel the same way about them. The numbers are comparable for angry and a little higher for frustrated. As we talk about all the things we've talked about here today, it is hard for me to imagine those numbers getting any better in the next half century to full century. Am I being too pessimistic? You gave me a look. Yeah?
Oh, yeah, you're being way too pessimistic.
Good, tell me why.
The tide has turned. What has happened since the 1960s is we've had the political scientists encouraging people to get voters by dividing the electorate. This cycle, you've got both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump providing narratives. Now, they're narratives that show extremes, but it's enabling other people to jump in with center-line narratives. And I think it's worth looking at people like Johnson and Weld.
All right. Oh, the libertarians and our former governor. All right. Interesting idea. Dante, you get the last word here because we're going to wrap up.
I think if you look at those numbers, the numbers for angry and frustrated are similar. The numbers for afraid are higher among Democrats for Republicans. I mean, that is not an irrational response to the Trump phenomenon. You know, you have Republicans who are saying that they don't want his finger on the nuclear button. So if Democrats are afraid of that, then that sounds surprising.
We got to leave it there. You get the last word next time. Sorry. Thank you, Tom, Heather, and Dante. Appreciate it.